Welcome everybody to the Nikon Z7 and Z6 Fast Start. My name is John Greengo, and in this class we're going to be doing a complete look through and examination of the Z7 and Z6 cameras. We're going to go through all the dials and buttons. We're going to talk about what they do and how to set them for a variety of types of uses. We're going to go through the entire menu system and talk about what all the features are, what they do, and how you might want to set the camera up for what you want to do. Along with this class, the purchase of the class, you do get this recommended settings guide that I have put out. And what I've always tried to do in the past is to take the entire menu system, because I'm a very visual person, I like to see all the menu on a single page. And I didn't do that this time. Because there are so many things in the menu, I've had to move it onto 2 pages. And so there is the entire menu on 1 page, and then continued onto a 2nd page, along with my recommended settings, at least for anybody getting started with this camera. There are recommendations in there for more advanced users and basic users. And then as you get towards the back of this, there'll be some other information about setting up the camera for different types of photography. So this goes along with the presentation in the class, so you might want to have that with you as well. So I guess before we get too much into the class, I should just talk about this camera a little bit. I'm a long time Nikon user. In fact, Nikon was the first interchangeable lens camera that I had back in the late 80s. And I got it because I asked my teacher at the time, what do most professionals shoot? And that was Nikon. And so I says, okay, I want to get something that works in that ecosystem. And they've continued to use that lens mount, and this is the first camera of the next generation for Nikon. So obviously it's a big and important camera for them because it's groundbreaking, all new territory. And you can tell the engineers have done their homework. They've really thought about things, and they've put together a really, really well put together piece of equipment. I've taken this out shooting this a number of times and have very much enjoyed it. This is not a review of the camera. This is how to work the camera. But my general thoughts are this is a fantastic camera. Right now it's new, so there's not a lot of lenses, so the ecosystem is kind of small, but there is the adapter, the mount adapter, so you can use all the older Nikon lenses. And my feeling is as people start shifting to mirrorless, you're going to start seeing people move out of their DSLRs and their lenses, and those DSLR lenses are going to be a little bit more affordable in the future. So if you don't mind using the adapter, you can still get a lot of quality glass for this going forward as they introduce more and more lenses that are directly mountable onto this camera. So let's go ahead and get into a quick introduction about what we're going to be doing into this class. All right, so I've broken this class up into a few different sections. We're going to start with a quick class overview to talk about what we're going to talk about. A few minutes of photo basics for anyone who is kind of new to photography or just wants to brush up on a few minutes of the basics. Most of the class is going to be in the camera controls and menu functions, and this is where we go through and detail each of the individual parts of the camera and what it does. And then finally, we'll end it off with camera operation. I'll give you a few tips on how to set the camera up for different types of photography. Now, this class is not directly a substitute for the instruction manual. There's still some things in the instruction manual that are valuable, but I've tried to take everything that's important and critical for most users who are trying to get the highest quality images and trying to operate the camera in a manual manner, and I've included that in this class. But there are some other little deep stats and other things in that instruction manual that you may need around from time to time. Now, this class is not a substitute for a basic photography class. If you've just gotten into photography and you are taking this class because you want to learn how to use your camera, great, that's a good place to start. But there is the whole world of shutter speeds and apertures and exposure and focusing and composition and lighting that we're not even really going to get into at all in this class because we're so focused on what this camera does and how to work this particular camera. So if you are looking for a photography class, there's lots of great classes out there. I have a couple of classes. One's a little bit shorter, one's a little bit longer, depending on how in-depth into the subject you want to get in. If you are new to Nikon, well, Nikon has been around for more than 100 years now. They started with rangefinder cameras. They wanted to make something small and portable. Then the whole system kind of shifted towards single lens reflex, and so their first camera was a very professional level camera at the time. Their Nikon F mount, and that is the lens mount that they have carried forward and is still current today, albeit in some slightly modified forms. Next big change for them was in about 1986, where they introduced their first autofocus camera and autofocus lenses. And so lenses went through another changeover at this point, changing them from manual to autofocus. And then the next big change came with digital, the D1, their first digital camera. I remember this one. It was highly sought after by the professionals because it had a whopping 2.7 megapixels and was less than $5,000 in price. In 2011, Nikon experimented with mirrorless cameras. And so for about 6 or 7 years, they had this Nikon One system that had interchangeable lenses. It was a mirrorless camera, had very fast autofocus, but it also had a very small sensor. And so it was not real popular among the enthusiasts or serious or professional photographers. And I think it's where Nikon was kind of dipping their toes in the world of mirrorless to see what works, what doesn't work, what would they do if they wanted to design a full-on, full-frame professional system. And I'm sure that they used a lot of that information in the development of this camera. So it was introduced in 2018. It's the new Nikon Z mount system. So we have a whole new set of lenses, and they've changed the size of the lens mount. They've changed the distance between the mount and the sensor. And so the lenses are very different. And so we'll talk definitely more about that as we go through the class today. So the Nikon system as it stands today, the recording of this particular class, the Nikon SLR system is the majority of their business. They make full-frame cameras, they make crop frame cameras that range from entry-level to top-of-the-line professional cameras, and this is the system that they've been working with for quite some time. And so we now have a new mirrorless system in the full frame, the Z7 and the Z6. And there is somewhat limited compatibility between various pieces here. And so I'll talk more about that when we get more into the lens section. But you can use the older F-mount lenses on these new Z cameras with the right adapter. At this time, they do not make a 1.5 crop mirrorless camera. As far as the rumors go, some people think they might, some people think maybe they're not going to, and they'll just stay full frame. Nobody knows. Not really an issue at this point, and so they're concentrating on full frame mirrorless with these cameras. As far as the care and handling of this camera, there's a lot of things you're obviously not supposed to do, and I'm not going to bother with them because they've got pages of that in the instruction manual. But the camera is weather sealed. It is considered to be dust and drip resistant, and that really doesn't have an exact definition. Can it handle a rain? Yeah. How much rain? How long? I don't know. It'll depend a little bit on the weather sealing of the particular lens you have on there. It's not something that I would stick underwater for sure. It's not something that I would want to go out and shoot in a heavy rainstorm for a long period of time. It's probably fine for a moderate amount of time. And so it is the same weather sealing as the D850, which is a very professional level camera. Not actually their top-of-the-line professional camera, but it is a professional level camera. So it is quite good, but you do want to be careful if you were going to get around excessive amounts of water. All right, let's make sure that your camera and lens is ready for today's class. You'll need a battery. It takes about 2.5 hours to charge it. You'll need one of the XQD memory cards. You'll need to put on a lens. Make sure the lens is in autofocus. There's a switch on the side of the lens. And then turn the zoom ring to the shooting position if that applies to you. So let me show you on my camera right here, because I do have this 24-70 f4. And this is part of their S line of lenses, which is their entire lineup of lenses. And this has a retracted non-shooting position when it's set to this white dot, which is a little off from the 24. So if you want to shoot pictures here, if you turn it on the back of the camera, you're going to get this little warning that you need to extend the lens to its shooting position. Now, some people might find this a little bit frustrating that you have to turn it over here. It's not that big a deal, but it helps make the lens a little bit smaller when you are not using the camera so that you can put it in a slightly smaller bag. I think, in my opinion, Nikon missed an opportunity here, and they could have labeled this a T lens as a travel lens that's very good for travel photography. And this is something that a traveling photographer would like, is, you know, a good, nice zoom range. And then when it's not being used, it's a little bit smaller when it's put away in the camera bag. But in any case, Nikon calls all of their lenses S-line lenses right now. And so you do need to have it out into that shooting position before you start shooting. Next up, go ahead and turn the camera on, which is right around the shutter release. You can move the mode dial to the auto section. That kind of hurts me personally, but for simplicity, it's perfectly fine. And then go ahead and press down on the shutter release to take a photo. And I'm going to do all of that right now myself. Put it over here on my test scene just to make sure, yes, the camera is working and it is ready to go in this class. All right, let's talk about the Z7 versus Z6 for the moment. I was kind of torn into bits as to whether to create two classes when these cameras came out, do one for the Z6 and another one for the Z7, because I like to have a class that's really dedicated and hones in on one specific product. And I said, well, let me just dig into the details and see how much of a difference between these two cameras there is. And the difference between the two really just comes down to the sensor. There's like two small things other than the sensor, but it's the resolution of the sensor and everything else that's kind of related to that. So with the sensor, we have a 45 and a 24 megapixel sensor, different resolution between the two. And what that means is that the camera's ISO range is going to be slightly different between the two. And so the Z7's native resolution, the best quality images, the best quality information is going to come at ISO 64. For the Z6, it's going to be at 100. The camera I have in front of me is the Z7. It doesn't really matter for this class. It could have been the Z6, but that's just what I have in front of me here. The number of focusing points, and I don't know if this is directly due to the sensor and where the focusing points are, or if they just decided to give the Z7 more focusing points. I think it's just related to the pixels and how the sensor is designed. We do have more focusing points on the Z7. How this actually affects focusing out in the real world, I haven't done a direct comparison, but from all the information I've been able to gather, it's virtually non-existent. You can be a little bit more precise about where the focusing point is with the Z7, but it's insignificant, and I wouldn't be buying one camera over the other because of that. The maximum frames per second is going to have to deal with how much information the camera is recording at any one point in time. And so if you're shooting less resolution, you are going to be able to shoot at faster frames per second, which means the buffer, how many images you can shoot at one time, is also going to be higher. And so that's a bit of an advantage with the Z6. The 4K video is going to be a little bit higher quality with the Z6 because of the way that information is being oversampled and recorded into that video file. And so people who have done the video comparisons have noticed a little bit better image quality with the Z6 than the Z7. Z7 for people doing landscapes is probably the best, or travel photography, portrait product photography. For shooting video, for shooting action, maybe the Z6 is a slightly better version of the two cameras. I did an extensive search through both cameras side by side in the menu system looking for differences, and there is only one difference that I could find other than resolution rates and size of files and so forth, and that was there is a 4:5 cropping option in the Z7 that is not there in the Z6. Now, of course, if you have a Z6, you can just crop your image into 4:5 after the fact. You just can't do it in camera. So that's the only menu item difference between the two cameras. They all have, both cameras have exactly the same button layout. The shell of the camera is the same. The only exterior difference that you're going to see is on the label and title of the camera where it says Z6 and Z7. And when you go through the menu system, the 4:5 crop is the only additional feature that you're going to see in the Z7. The battery life is got a slight difference between the two. I have no idea why the Z7 is a little bit longer, but it's only a very small amount at that. So that's your class overview for the Z7 and Z6. Okay, this next section is photo basics. It's for anyone who's kind of new to interchangeable lens cameras, who just doesn't mind brushing up on some of those basics a little bit. So this is a mirrorless camera, but we have interchangeable lenses like we've had on cameras for quite some time. In the lenses is an aperture that can vary the size of the opening, which is good for exposure reasons. You can let in more light or less light with the different f-stops that you choose. Each one of these f-stop settings is either going to double or cut in half the amount of light that you let in. Beyond controlling the amount of light, it also controls your depth of field, or how much is going to be in focus in the field in front of you. So 1.4 is going to give you very shallow depth of field. Those red lines over on the right-hand side of the screen are showing you an indication of the front edge and the back edge of what is in focus. As we stop the aperture down, we get more and more depth of field until we get down to f22, which is going to be the maximum depth of field, at least on this lens. Some lenses will stop down beyond 22. It's going to vary from lens to lens. Once light comes in through the lens, it needs to get to the sensor, but before it can get there, it needs to get past the shutter. The shutter has two parts, a first and a second curtain. Now with a mirrorless camera, in order for you to see and frame up your subject, these shutters need to be open so that light can get back to the sensor so you can see what's going on either on the LCD screen on the back of the camera or through the electronic viewfinder with your camera held up right up to your eye. So what happens with the shutter is kind of interesting, because with the mirrorless camera we start with it open and then it needs to close so that the sensor can charge and be ready to capture an image. And then it opens, this is your exposure, and then the second shutter comes down, the sensor turns off, captures the image, and then the shutter opens again so that you can see and compose for the next shot. So the shutter is important for controlling light. It's a primary thing, and then secondary, it also helps control how sharp or blurry moving subjects are going to be in the frame, and so you would choose appropriate shutter speeds to what you're trying to do for a particular photograph. So those are the key elements in this mirrorless camera. Now, one of the most important things in any camera is the image sensor, and specifically the size of the image sensor is very important. And so this camera uses what is considered to be a large sensor. There are larger than this, but it's still, in the general sense of things, a pretty large one. It's based off of 35mm film in size. And there are many other cameras out there that have smaller size sensor. This one is known as full frame because it's the same size as 35. And as I say, there are many other cameras that do have smaller size sensors. And in general, the larger the sensor, the better quality images you will get from that camera. So if you would like more information on cameras and photography, as I mentioned, I do have a couple of classes that you might want to check out if you haven't seen them. I have a shorter one called the Photography Starter Kit for Beginners. It's about 3-4 hours or so and gets you through all the most important basics very quickly and clearly. Then if you want to dive in more deeply into all of the subjects and have lots of additional topics to go over, my full Fundamentals of Photography is a very in-depth class that will take you and explore all different aspects of photography. Okay, folks, it is time to get into the deep part about this class and to the camera settings. We're going to be going through a tour of the camera. We're going to talk about all the buttons and dials and everything you can see and turn and press on the camera itself. So let's talk about some of the basic controls that we're going to be using for a little bit of everything. So obviously turning the camera on is going to help out. Going through this class, when you turn the camera off, the camera goes through an automatic sensor cleaning. And what it does here is it tries to knock all the dust off the sensor. Any dust on the sensor will manifest itself as black spots. You'll notice it most like on a bright sky. There'll just be a black dot. At first it looks like a bird, but then you go in and you realize, oh, that's a round bird. And that's probably a speck of dust, and I'll talk about cleaning the camera a little bit later on, but that is something the camera will do on its own. The shutter release for taking photos, also for waking the camera up. All cameras tend to like to go to sleep to conserve battery power, and just pressing halfway down on that shutter release will wake the camera up. The main control dials on the back, which is the main control dial, and on the front are called the sub-command dial. I will probably forget these names throughout the class, and I'll just call it the back dial and the front dial. And We're going to be using those for changing shutter speeds, apertures, going through the menu system, and doing a whole host of different things on the camera. We do have a major control for switching between photo and video. We will talk more about this as we get into the class. And so if you want to take still photos or you want to shoot movies, very different modes, because the camera kind of remembers what you're doing in these two very distinctly different types of scenarios. The multi-selector on the back of the camera is another name that I will probably forget, and it's the up, down, left, right control, usually used for navigating the menu system and selecting items in there. You can also use it for moving the focusing point around. The OK button is the confirmation button, so when you select a new feature that you want to enable, you're probably going to go up, down, left, and right, navigate to it, and then say OK, that yes, this is the one that you want to do. We do have a second controller, the sub-selector. Its primary duty is moving the focusing point, but you can also use it for doing other things in the camera as well in some cases, so be aware of that. And finally, we have a touch screen. So this is something that you can use to focus, you can take photos, you can navigate the menu system, you can scroll through images in playback. It's a pretty responsive system that works quite well in most every single mode on the camera. If you don't like it because maybe your nose hits the screen when you're holding the camera, you can disable it so that it's not being used. Now, a quick word about some of the Nikon buttons, specifically the ISO and the exposure compensation button. On these buttons, the way they work is that you need to hold them down while you are turning the main command dial, the dial on the back of the camera. And this is kind of a safety protocol so that you don't accidentally press the button and do something that you didn't intend to do. And so it's a two-finger affair in order to do this. If you do not like that two-finger affair, there is a way to get in and change it. If you go into the menu system, the custom setting menu, group F for controls, F6 to be exact, there is a feature called release button to use dial. And in this case, what you do is you press down on the button and then you release the button, and then you have pretty much as much time as you want to turn the dial and make that change. That way you only need one finger at a time. And so this little box that you see on screen here is something that you will see repeatedly throughout this class, and it's called a shortcut. And it's for those of you who are watching the class and you are wanting to go in and make that change right now. I'm going to give you that shortcut step so that you can go in and change your camera as we go through the class. If you just kind of want to follow along and you don't want to jump ahead, don't worry. We're going to come back and we're going to cover that particular feature when we get into the menu system, specifically the custom menu and the controls section. We will talk again about this particular feature. The shutter release, obviously used for taking the photos, actually controls a number of other features as well. So by pressing it halfway down, it wakes the camera up if it's been sleeping. Also, if you are in the menu or you're in some other place in the camera and you're thinking, I just want to back out of this thing and I want to take a photo, press halfway down on the shutter release and it automatically kicks you back to the start, you might say, and gets you out of whatever menu you might be in. It's also going to start the metering system, and then when you press all the way down, obviously you're taking a photo. So just be very familiar with that halfway position on the shutter release. So one of the things that has become quite popular is something known as back button autofocus. And this is where you are pressing a button on the back of the camera to focus, and when you press the shutter release, the only thing it does is take a picture, probably turns on the metering system, but doesn't have focusing associated with the shutter release. Now, putting this camera into back button autofocus is really, really simple. You simply go into custom setting menu A, A7 to be precise, and you turn off the AF activation that is associated with the shutter release. So when you press down on the shutter release, it will no longer activate the autofocus system. You'll have to use the AF on button on the back of the camera. And this can be a great way for just giving yourself a little bit more control over the camera so that you can specifically focus in one case and just take pictures in the other case and not have the two combined. It's really nice when you want to focus on a subject, but you want to move the camera around and you don't want to have to refocus every time you end up taking a photo. And so it's a feature that I use and I really like on my cameras. And so I encourage you to give it a try if you want to have a little bit more control on the camera.